Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be talking about a case that's gone unsolved for nearly 20 years. There's a lot of opinions out there to work through, so let's try and get to the bottom of it. Today's episode is about the murders of Michael, Mary, and Jennifer Short. The Shorts lived in Bassett, Virginia. It's a quaint and quiet town located in the southern area of the state, the kind of place where nothing ever happened. That was until August 15th, 2002, when its community would be stunned by a tragedy which would be shrouded in mystery for nearly 2 decades. Michael Short was a 50-year-old business owner, and his wife, Mary, was 36.
It's quite the age difference, eh?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. They had a 9-year-old daughter, Jennifer, who attended Figsborough Elementary School. The family lived a quiet life and, for the most part, kept to themselves. They didn't air their personal business to anyone, and you'd be shocked to hear someone speak poorly of them. They were friendly and well-liked. After all, they were very normal people living very normal lives. They were a hard-working, middle-class family, Mary having worked factory jobs here and there throughout her life, while Michael owned and operated their mobile home moving company. Basically, he would arrange all the specifics that go along with moving a mobile home. It's apparently not as easy as one might think, especially depending on the size of the trailer or mobile home.
Well, I guess a mobile home ain't so mobile then, is it?
But I guess not. There's apparently a lot of other logistics that go into it, so. But it seems like there must have been a decent-sized market for this type of business. I'd imagine it wasn't very easy or really even possible to do without proper equipment and licensing.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you probably need one of those wide-load trailers, which is probably not that easy to do.
Yeah, I agree. I have this weird memory of when I was a kid. I used to be so fascinated when I would see one of those trucks driving on the highway or something. I'd be like, oh my God, it's moving a house. That's someone's whole life in there. And you could just pick it up and move it. Were you fascinated as a child?
No, I wasn't.
Michael's business was located in Virginia, and it seems that in order to do business as a mobile home mover, you were required to be licensed in the states you'll be moving cargo to and from. Around this time, Michael's business was struggling, and because of this, he and his family were considering making a move to South Carolina. He'd visited the area several times to get a general idea of where they might live and where his business could be operated. It's speculated he had made some acquaintances down there as he chatted with people about his potential relocation. Unfortunately, the Shorts would never have that opportunity to start this new life. At 9 a.m. on August 15th, 2002, one of Michael's employees, Chris Thompson, would show up to their home. It's unclear if he was meeting Michael there to head to a job or if Chris had attempted to get in touch with him and, when being unsuccessful, showed up to find him. Either way, when Chris arrives at the Shorts' home, he is horrified by what he finds. Michael Short had been shot dead on the couch in his garage. Mary murdered while asleep in her bed. Chris would call police immediately. It's stated that the call was placed around 9 a.m., so he likely called right after he got there. When police arrived, they would find a scarily clean crime scene. 2 people had been murdered, shot in the head, yet nothing was out of place. It didn't seem like anything was stolen. The home wasn't ransacked. What was the motivation behind this atrocity? It was later determined that both parents were shot with a .22 caliber pistol.
That's interesting. A .22 caliber is a fairly small round. I mean, obviously it can still kill. But I find it odd that someone clearly going somewhere to murder people would choose that type of ammunition or firearm.
So then, do you think it could have something to do with the weight of the gun? Is a .22 caliber lighter than a 9mm? I feel like that's the only other gun I know, but maybe that it could be easily concealed or something, in someone's jacket or their waistband?
Yeah, I mean, it could be lighter, but I think the weight is pretty inconsequential. Generally, with smaller ammunition, the firearm could be smaller too, but there's no knowing what kind of firearm it was. So maybe it could have been to conceal it easier.
Okay. The responding detective that day, Curtis Spence, who is now a retired lieutenant, found Michael dead in his garage, laying on the couch with a bullet wound in his forehead. It looked as though Mike had been asleep, having no idea what was coming.
He was sleeping on a couch in the garage?
Yeah, it seemed like he had made it kind of like a hangout area. Like he converted it into almost like a secondary living room. And honestly, he probably just fell asleep there that night.
Ah, gotcha.
Now, Mary would be found in the couple's bedroom, still lying in bed with the covers over her body, a bullet wound in the back of her head. Again, it appeared as though the attack was quick and precise as she slept. The suspect is believed to have walked in through the garage, shot Michael, swiftly moved to their bedroom, killing Mary. It didn't appear as though there was any sort of struggle in the home.
To me, this is like almost reminiscent of a professional hit, just based on what you've told me so far.
Yeah, seriously. To think that this suspect got in the house, kills Michael, and Mary doesn't hear a thing, I mean, that's crazy. And then, what about their daughter? Well, as investigators are dealing with that horrific scene, they noticed exactly that. Jennifer was missing. Authorities sprung into action immediately, searching the area for any clues to indicate where she might be. Over 40 officers at the time would be assigned to Jennifer's missing persons case to assist in hopefully finding her. Hundreds of volunteers would come together in the search for Jennifer over several weeks. Multiple police agencies, state and federal, would work to find the missing 9-year-old. At this point in the investigation, there were no real clues as to where she might be, whether that be that whoever killed her parents had abducted her, or maybe she had run away from the horrific sight she'd just seen.
I think that could go either way. I mean, a 9-year-old could definitely have the wherewithal to hear what's happening and attempt to escape.
Absolutely, I could totally see that happening. According to Curtis Spence, the responding officer, it was considered one of the largest crimes that had ever happened in Bassett, Virginia. I can only imagine that the case was even more difficult to work because he stated that he'd known the family personally. As police continue their search for Jennifer, her extended family goes on the news and pleads that her abductor bring her home. Hearing her family so heartbroken and choked up about what had occurred really hit me hard.
Yeah, it's always difficult to imagine being in the position of these families.
Ugh, I know. I feel like every time I research these cases, I'm brought to tears by the heartbreak I see from these families, but they deserve justice, and we're here trying to bring awareness to these unsolved cases. As I continued my research, something interesting caught my attention. Police would hire a translator to speak with several current and previous employees of Michael's who only spoke Spanish. Yes, okay, this is a great idea and super helpful to the case, but it's one of those things that's also frustrating. So, side rant real quick, it made me think about Jennifer Kessie's case and how police didn't even speak to any of the maintenance workers that spoke Spanish. You could potentially get so much information from talking to people like this, and the fact that they hired a translator to do just that in this case is promising and makes me question why every investigatory team doesn't think like this.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's great that it was done here, but it's not like it's something way out of left field. It doesn't take a brain scientist to say, hey, maybe these people might know something. Let's get somebody that speaks their language to ask them some questions.
Brain scientist.
Or rocket surgeon, whichever you prefer.
Oh yeah, I like rocket surgeon. Nearly a month and a half would go by before the town is unfortunately rocked to its core. Skeletal remains are discovered in Stoneville, North Carolina, roughly 50 miles or 80 kilometers south of the Shorts' home in Bassett. As mentioned previously, Bassett is in the southern area of Virginia, and Stoneville is right at the top of North Carolina, so the two towns are only about a 30-minute drive from each other. The woman who discovered the remains had seen that her dog was playing with something and come to find out it was a skull. Aside from the skull being found, this wasn't the first strange instance coming from that property, though they hadn't prompted a call to police just yet. There were supposedly teeth found at the end of the driveway at one point, along with a girl's tennis shoe. And apparently what was believed to be a wig was also found on the property a few weeks before the skull. But now that had been located, are we sure it was really a wig? I doubt we'll ever really know.
What the hell? How do you find teeth and shoes on your property and not call the police?
I literally thought the exact same thing. Who knows? Well, as soon as the skull is discovered, police would head to the property and conduct an extremely extensive search. They even drained the entire lake and would search the property for 3 days. Based on where they found most of the bones, it seems as though the body had been dumped over a bridge and the bones would end up scattered all over. One of the officers had mentioned in an interview that he remembered carrying the remains off in a paper bag. Just to think about the image of that poor girl being brought home in a paper bag brought me to tears. At this time, though, authorities and the public did not know who the remains belonged to. Though, about a week later, after DNA testing had been done, It was confirmed that the skeletal remains found in Stoneville, North Carolina, were, in fact, those of Jennifer Shorts. During the examination of the body, the ME was able to determine that Jennifer was also shot in the head with a .22 caliber gun.
I guess that makes it fairly evident then that whoever shot her parents ended up killing her too.
Exactly. As we continue on in our story, I want to go over some of the evidence we have. Let's start with the Shorts' home. As I'd previously mentioned, the scene looked immaculate. One contributing factor could have been the capabilities of the person who carried out the murders, but another is that the Shorts' home had recently been put on the market. And if anyone has ever sold a house before, you know how stressful it is. That thing needs to be spick and span for showings, having people in and out of the house all the time. So, with it being so clean, you would assume that if there was any sort of struggle before the murders took place, that you would absolutely have noticed it in their house.
I mean, I guess, but we kind of know there wasn't a struggle from the parents. It seemed like Michael and Mary had both been killed in their sleep. I suppose Jennifer could have made a mess trying to escape?
Yeah, that's true, but police would go on to confirm that there was no struggle based on the initial walkthrough of the house. And something else that popped into my head that I kind of mentioned earlier was that they probably had people in and out of their house because they were trying to sell it.
Okay, I see where you're going. So maybe the person or persons were in there scouting the house and that's how they knew the layout? I mean, it could have been a maintenance person coming in to fix something, or maybe somebody that went to a showing.
Exactly. Then they would know where all the respective rooms were and could identify how to quickly get in and out of the house. I mean, I'm curious to see if someone was able to look up records for this. Did they even keep records of who had been shown the house, or did they cross-reference the list with any potential suspects? I mean, I feel like there's a lot that could be done with that information. It makes me think that maybe something could come of this later if the case is ever solved.
I think that most open houses would have a sign-in book. I don't think you're obligated to sign it, but if it was shown by a realtor as a separate showing, I think they would absolutely know who they showed it to.
Yeah, definitely, but who knows if anyone looked into that? It hasn't been made public knowledge if they have. As police would continue their inspection of the home, the one and only thing that stood out to the responding officer was Jennifer's bedroom. He stated that her mattress was pushed to the side very slightly, less than 2 inches. Her pillow was also on the floor. But other than that, like I said before, it was immaculate. And what I find weird about this whole thing is the fact that there was barely any blood in the house. So, to me, this for sure means it was a quick attack. Michael was shot and died on the couch and bled out there, and Mary was shot very shortly after and bled in the bed. No one else had been injured in the home, no transfer of blood, no fluids, nothing. You would think that if Jennifer was in the home at the time of the crime that she would have tried to fight, right?
I think it all depends on the suspect or suspects involved. Who's to say this wasn't more than one person with one murder weapon?
I mean, I guess, but there really isn't anything to suggest that there was more than one person responsible, at least at this point. Police would go on to collect over 1,000 pieces of evidence. I'm not sure I understand why or even how they did this from such a strangely clean crime scene. How did they collect so many items?
Well, I think that if this was such a huge crime in the area at the time, they probably collected everything they could. It's always better to gather more than not enough.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I just think 1,000 pieces of evidence, I feel like that's every item in their house. It feels like a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it does. Who knows how evidence is labeled, though? It could be each picture was, one piece of evidence, and they took a ton of pictures.
True. Okay. Crime scene investigators would also go over the entire scene with luminol and find nothing. This is just crazy. Not one spot of blood anywhere else in the house other than where Michael and Mary's bodies laid. It really makes me think that this could have absolutely been a professional hit. Are you on the same page?
100%. They entered the house unnoticed, killed Michael quietly enough to not alert anyone else in the house, and then proceeded up to kill Mary. I'm thinking that this was professional, and also that there could have been more than one person involved.
What makes you think that there was more than one person involved? Is it because Jennifer was taken? So one person comes in and kills the parents and then the other subdues and abducts Jennifer?
So there's nothing that's stated yet that concretely proves this, but I think that if it was professional, you can't rule out two killers. Everything appeared to have gone so smoothly.
Okay, I see where you're leaning and why you're leaning that way, but I think we need more info. Based on where we are in the timeline of events, I wanted to bring up something that I thought was pretty smart of police to do. When Michael and Mary were laid to rest, the police would attend the funeral. They wanted to watch all the attendees and see their behavior. Was anyone acting strange? Were they inserting themselves into the investigation? We hear about this all the time in true crime shows, but of course my favorite being Criminal Minds. That is a huge part of the behavior of some killers. They want to be a part of the investigation, but sometimes give themselves away because of it. Unfortunately, police don't uncover any new leads. Now, let's move on and talk about the theories surrounding the case. There are several, so I'll begin with the info people tend to get hung up on the most. Who was the target of the crime? Were the suspects attempting to murder the Shorts or abduct Jennifer? Well, like we talked about before, Mike and Mary Short were quiet. They were homebodies and mostly kept to themselves. They had no enemies. Why then would someone want them dead? I'll go first. I can 100% see why people believe this may have been a hit because of how quick and clean the murders were, but I just don't know if I'm on board with this theory. I want to see more evidence of why people would think that. Like, have police discovered that there was anyone with a grudge against the family? I don't know, I need more before I could say wholeheartedly, yep, definitely a hit, especially because of the fact that Jennifer was involved in this and also killed. Was she collateral damage? Did the person executing the hit not know that there was a child involved?
So I'm totally on board with the idea of this being a contract killing of some sort. If you think about it, Michael's business was failing. Did he take out loans from some shady people? Was he trying to get out of Virginia to get away from these people? Trying to sell the house to make back some money to pay them and relocate to South Carolina to try and start fresh? The fact that the killings were carried out so cleanly and seemingly quietly lends to the thought that this person knew what they were doing.
Okay. I can get on board with what you're saying here. I don't know why I didn't put two and two together to think that his potentially failing business could have had something to do with this. It's a really good point. The other, and what I believe, well, now maybe believed to be more obvious theory, is that the killer had targeted Jennifer, not Michael and Mary. I'm on board with what John is saying about the potential for a hit because of his failing business, but I'd need a little more to go on. But either way, regarding Jennifer being the target, the parents were just in the way in this theory, and I think we can all assume that this is what most people seem to believe, that the perpetrator is a sexual predator. Maybe he'd been watching Jennifer for some time and chose this day to strike and abduct her?
I don't know. Why do people believe this to be more correct than the previous theory? Someone very well could have been looking to kill the parents and saw Jennifer as an afterthought. It's not tough to imagine that a person willing to kill people would be willing to abduct a young girl as well. I don't think a sexual predator can be synonymous with a murderer in this case. If they wanted to solely abduct Jennifer, they could have most likely found another way to do it. I mean, they were able to enter the house without anyone knowing.
Yeah, I can see that, but it's hard to believe, though, that someone who had potentially come to the house to carry out this hit would then abduct Jennifer. I know this is awful to say, but why wouldn't they just kill her as well? They end up doing that later anyway, so why take her? I think that's where I get hung up the most on this case. Who knows what the plan was, but we know that there are no real indicators that would point us in the direction of anyone in particular that may have had their eye on Jennifer. Her friends and family were all interviewed and asked if there was anyone who paid special attention to her in the months and weeks before the murders. No one could recall anything. Either that's not the reason for the attack on the family, or the person watching was very inconspicuous.
Well, I did make you watch Fargo not too long ago, and from that you can see that plans don't always go accordingly. Jennifer could have heard 2 gunshots in the house, fled, and then she could have been chased down and caught outside, so they killed her and dumped the body over the bridge, as opposed to leaving her on the side of the road where she was caught, or bringing her back to the house.
True, bringing her back would be really risky. Let's dive deeper into the theories around what happened and how Jennifer may have been abducted. The first is that she'd been kidnapped directly from the scene and that whoever committed this crime intimidated her with the gun and took her from the home without a struggle. The second is that Jennifer had run from the home while the murders were taking place, and the perpetrator tracked her down and found her after she fled, and then had her and did whatever it is they did with her. The last potential theory on this subject, at least that I've seen discussed and could hold some weight, is that she wasn't even in the home when the murders occurred, and that when she came home, the person who killed her parents was lying in wait and abducted her before she could even see the atrocities inside her home.
I don't know, to go along with what I was saying before, I'm leaning towards everyone being in the home and Jennifer being taken either while running away or maybe even from her bed. The room did appear like there could have been a slight struggle with the mattress being moved a bit.
I'm not entirely sure which theory I agree with. I feel like they're all plausible in some way, but let me drop this bombshell on you. The phone lines to the home were cut. Was this a premeditated attack then? That the killer planned this and cut the phone lines just in case things went wrong and one of the occupants of the home attempted to call authorities.
How could you hold out on this? That absolutely makes me believe that this was a professional hit. It's happening exactly like it would in a movie or a book. The perpetrators cut the phone lines so nobody can call 911. They break in and kill Michael and Mary without them even knowing. And as Jennifer wakes up to the sound of gunshots, she either attempts to flee or she's found in a room and taken from there.
100%. Definitely a plausible theory. Also, police had said in a few interviews that I guess the cutting of the phone line was important because it wasn't an easy task, that they had to pick out exactly the correct line to cut, and only the specific one that needed to be cut was. I don't really understand the idea behind this, but police also mentioned that the person would have had to brought a tool with them to cut the line.
I know I'm repeating myself here, but come on. This is obviously premeditated and most likely professional.
So, the big question, why did this happen? Can we come to the conclusion of who the target was?
I'm saying that the family itself was the target. I have a feeling that Michael may have been in over his head with his business, maybe borrowing money from the wrong people or something like that.
I think saying the family themselves was the target seems reasonable. That all fits with the evidence better, at least in my mind. But it seems like most people believe that Jennifer was the target. The factors they cite to push us towards this theory include the swiftness and execution style of the parents' murders, the fact that Jennifer was taken from the scene and her body dumped elsewhere, the phone line being cut and location of the crime itself, meaning the family's home and where Jennifer's body is found. The important thing to note about the area is that the Shorts' home was in a relatively rural area, and same with the property that Jennifer's body would later be discovered on. Both locations would be difficult to just stumble upon if you weren't familiar with the area. Right, familiarity with the area. That's kind of a big deal with this case. Many people, including police, believe that the killer is someone who knew the family or at least knew the area.
I don't know. If someone was assigned or paid or was planning on this act, they're researching. They don't need to be someone from the area.
Yes, definitely true, but I can't quite tell what police believe, but I think they're leaning towards it being someone the Shorts knew. And I'm sure as I say that, you're wondering if police had investigated Chris Thompson, the employee that found the Shorts the day they were killed. He obviously knew the family and the area, and I'm not sure if he was in your mind as a potential suspect, but he was certainly in police's. He had actually even been seen with the family the night before they were killed, assisting with fixing a vehicle. Police vetted him completely, though, and confirmed that there was absolutely no evidence to indicate that he had anything to do with the murders.
Yeah, I didn't think he was involved in any way. Why would you kill a family and then be the one to report it? It makes zero sense.
Yeah, for sure. I'm totally on that page with you, but when I was researching, it came up a lot with people on Reddit and other forums, so I wanted to bring it to light that he wasn't even an option as a person of interest. So with this information, that brings me to our first person of interest in the case. And guys, oh my God, you are going to be right with me when I start telling you about all the insane things piling up against this guy. Bear with me, okay? There's a lot. So, our first person of interest is a man named Garrison Storm Bowman. He was a 60-year-old carpenter from the town of Mayodan, North Carolina, at the time the Short murders occurred.
How far away are these places?
It's about a 30 to 40-minute drive, give or take. Now, he's never officially named a suspect in the case, but police do say he is a person of interest fairly early on in the investigation. I want to give you a rundown of all the absolutely damning, but circumstantial evidence that just piles and piles against Bowman. Okay, so first off, he was seen in the area right after the Shorts are murdered, but then flees the area the day after they're killed. I know. He legit leaves the country and heads to Canada. This is for sure questionable right off the bat.
Sure, but just because he's seen nearby and leaves the next day doesn't say a whole lot. Maybe he had a trip already planned.
Well, you're right in thinking that. Apparently, one of his friends came forward at one point saying he had the trip planned ahead of time. So you may be wondering why we know anything at all about Mr. Bowman, and I was thinking the same thing. How did he come onto police's radar? Well, based on some online articles, it seems as though a man came forward with information about Bowman that put police onto him. This man's name is Gary Lemons, and he was the landlord for the apartment Bowman had and the place that his mobile home was housed down as well. At least that's what it seems like. The information is really foggy on this, but based on the info I could find online, it seems as though he had this apartment and he housed his trailer on the property as well. So first, Lemons had seen Bowman on August 15th, 2002, the day the Shorts are murdered. Then, the day after they're killed, Lemons said the trailer that Bowman owned was gone and his apartment was empty. Not only that, but he'd also seen him building what looked to be a false floor in his trailer. And apparently, Bowman had also told him that he'd gotten in some sort of verbal altercation with a man from Virginia who was supposed to be moving his mobile home for him. You catching on yet? 100% he's talking about Michael Short. Not only did he say he got in this verbal spat with him, but he claims he threatened to kill the man if he couldn't move the trailer for him.
Well, hot damn. This sounds like the police are on the right track looking into this guy.
Right? Like what? This is just insane at this point. We found out earlier in our story that you had to be licensed in the state you're moving the trailer to and from. Well, Garrison Bowman lived and housed his trailer in North Carolina. But as we know, the Shorts lived and worked and were most likely licensed in Virginia. So if he didn't want to be breaking the rules, I can see why Michael wouldn't have wanted to move this guy's mobile home for him.
Yeah, I suppose. I could see that.
We do find out later that Bowman had succeeded in getting that trailer moved by someone else and had it housed at a friend's house after he'd left for Canada the day after the Shorts were killed. Now it seems as though the police are really dialing in on Bowman after Jennifer's remains were found, about 1 mile from where his mobile home was being stored. And you'll never guess what they find in the trailer.
Let me guess. The gun used in the murders.
No, I told you wouldn't guess. They found maps. 9 of them. I know what you're thinking. Maps? What does that have to do with anything? Well, upon further inspection of them, at least one of them was marked. Marked in the general vicinity of where the Shorts' home was. Sure, it's circumstantial and doesn't scream, "Look at me, I killed them," but it's definitely suspicious. Lemons had also mentioned that the last day he saw Bowman, he saw him carrying a gun, one that looked like a pistol.
That certainly warrants some suspicion. But does this landlord have any reason to be falsely accusing Bowman?
There's some speculation that Lemons had believed Bowman would be leaving his mobile home to him, like before he went off to Canada, and got pissed off when he found out that Bowman had deeded the trailer to a friend instead.
Okay, so maybe this was a way for him to try and get back at him?
It could be, but let's keep going. To recap, Garrison Bowman was supposedly seen with a gun the same day the Shorts were murdered. He left the country the day after they were killed, had allegedly been seen building a false floor in his trailer, had apparently threatened to kill a man, matching the description of Michael Short because he wouldn't move his trailer, and Jennifer's body was found less than 2 miles from where he lived. Yeah, it all seems very sketchy. It's easy to see that one might believe that Garrison Bowman is a likely suspect in the murder. But remember, police have only named him as a person of interest at this point. Well, police would end up circling back to Bowman in October and found out that he actually had been arrested and was in prison in Canada. Oh, why was he in prison, you ask? Because apparently he violated immigration laws by, quote, not declaring a previous DUI conviction. So because of that, Canada actually deported him back to America after he spent a couple weeks in a Canadian prison. When he gets back to the United States, he's arrested on a, quote, material witness warrant. Now, as I was researching this, I truly had no idea what a material witness warrant was, and honestly, based on the name of it, it didn't make sense to me why Garrison was being arrested for that reason. Maybe it was the only thing they could get him on at this point? The definition of a material witness warrant, according to the website oig.justice.gov, is a type of warrant which, quote, provides for the arrest and detention of a person if his testimony is material in a criminal proceeding, and if it is shown that it may become impractical to secure the presence of the person by subpoena, end quote. Okay, so that makes a little more sense to me now. He's obviously important to the case, and police probably think he's a flight risk, so they did this to be able to detain him to then testify before the grand jury in the Short family murders. He would testify at the end of October, but was then released from custody on the 30th, after the grand jury was unable to come to a decision, and the case did not move forward with trial at this point. Also, during this time, it's learned that Garrison Bowman had taken a polygraph test and passed. So, as it stands, yes, Bowman is sketchy and has a lot of circumstantial evidence piling up against him, but there's nothing to concretely connect him to the case. Something else I wanted to bring up that I found to be interesting while researching this case, maybe inconsequential, but it was just so bizarre to me that I just feel the need to talk about it. I'd mentioned Bowman's landlord earlier, Gary Lemons. Well, Mr. Lemons had a funny way of getting himself involved in murders, even though he isn't the one committing them. We find out that years ago, back in 1981, literally 2 decades earlier, Gary had worked at or ran a demolition yard. He'd been asked by a woman named Brenda K. Nance Oakley to demolish her car. Obviously, thought nothing of it since it's his job, but as he's in the process of demolishing the car, he discovers the dismembered body of Brenda's husband, Daniel Russell Oakley Jr. His remains were discovered in the trunk of this vehicle. What? That is crazy. So now, 20 years later, he's gotten himself wrapped up in another case where someone he knew is potentially involved in such a heinous crime. And like we've talked about so many times before, the media took this information and ran with it, which I find to be so incredibly annoying. I feel like half the true crime cases in the world are trial by media, and it's so difficult to have anything be fairly prosecuted anymore. But either way, the media ran with the story of how Mr. Lemons had discovered the dead man 20 years ago, and how he's involved with Garrison Bowman now in the Short family murders. Police actually state that they never had any concern about Gary Lemons, and it was made known that he had taken a polygraph and passed. Not that this means anything. We know people can pass polygraph tests even if you're lying. Sheriff Frank Cassell is even quoted as stating, "Mr. Lemons doesn't alarm me. He may alarm the media, but not me. He said Lemons has never been a suspect in the Short case, only a witness who alerted police to suspicious activity. Mr. Lemons passed a polygraph. As far as I'm concerned, that says right much to me," end quote. I totally get what he's saying. I just found it to be so odd. This guy either has the world's worst luck, or he's terrible at choosing the people he surrounds himself with because they are clearly crazy.
True. How unlucky are you to be involved so closely with 2 murders in your lifetime? I'm surprised Lemons didn't leave a sour taste in the investigator's mouth.
Good one.
All jokes aside, though, I still get a strange feeling from Lemons. Like, why would Bowman have left all this evidence around, like the maps, and then dump a body near his trailer? Just doesn't make sense. And I'm not saying that this is true, but maybe Lemons was trying to frame him or something to get back at him for not leaving him the mobile home?
Definitely a valid thought, but seems like police didn't really agree. So at this point in our story, it doesn't really seem like we have a credible prime suspect. There's only circumstantial evidence, and the grand jury was unable to indict anyone. Also, Garrison Bowman died on Christmas Day in 2014, so even going back to him today wouldn't be very helpful. And is it just me, or do so many people who are persons of interest or suspects in a case end up dying before we get any answers? It's beyond frustrating.
It certainly seems that way.
There's a lot of speculation about who may have done this, but no concrete evidence, only theories. Authorities mentioned that they had received an FBI profile regarding the type of person that may have committed the act, but I cannot for the life of me find it anywhere online. Police did say, though, that it was a very generic and vague profile. The main thing people seem to believe is that whoever did this must have been familiar with the area. Like I said before, the Shorts lived out in the boonies, and Jennifer's body was also located in a super rural spot. The person who did this likely didn't just stumble upon those places. It was most likely carefully planned, especially because of what we learned previously about the phone line being cut. And again, it was such a quick execution-style killing.
I'm still not ruling out a professional hit. We need more information on Michael's financials.
100%. That information would be super helpful in coming up with a more concrete theory on who did this. There's also one more theory that I hadn't brought up yet. I think it was pretty far-fetched from the beginning, but it's important to our story. In late August, a tip would come in about a potential stalker of Mary Short's from nearly a decade earlier. Police review the information, and it comes to light that there's been some talk that Michael Short may not be Jennifer Short's biological father. This came out of left field. Like, what? Everyone said they were quiet, normal, and well-liked. What do you mean Michael might not actually be Jennifer's biological father? It seemed very unlikely, but police still went ahead and exhumed Michael's body in early September 2002. They were able to determine that he was, in fact, Jennifer's biological father based on paternity testing. However, this information now makes people believe that this potential stalker from years ago had thought he was Jennifer's biological father. But we obviously know that that's not true. But I'm telling you, people have run with this theory. I don't think this stalker had anything to do with it. And honestly, people who used to work with Mary couldn't even come up with who they believed that person had been. How is it that they wouldn't remember the guy's name? I mean, I remember people I worked with years and years ago, and I'll tell you, I 100% would remember someone who'd been accused of stalking in the past.
Yeah, I feel like this theory holds very little water.
Right? So where do we go from here then? Well, we don't really go anywhere for about 7 years. The case goes pretty stale, and there are no new promising leads for police to go off of, or so we thought. On March 19th, 2009, authorities would stun the public when they released 2 sketches. Yup, you heard that right. 2 sketches that they've had since the beginning. Why would police wait 7 years to release this information?
Well, that seems pretty dumb. Why would you hold out on putting that information out to the public?
Beats me. I honestly have no clue. The FBI had stated that there was a specific reason for releasing the sketches when they did, but the reason itself is never revealed. It's likely that the police still know something that we don't, and I guess that held them back from releasing this earlier on in the investigation. Regardless, looking at these sketches, I have a lot of thoughts. I've included both sketches in our Instagram post about this case at wicked.deeds.podcast and also on our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, if you want to have a visual aid while we discuss. So, the first of the 2 sketches is of a person. I'm not sure who provided police with the sketch, but it was said that the man was described as, quote, a man in his 40s with a weathered complexion, end quote. However, when I look at this sketch, I absolutely do not see someone with a weathered complexion. Honestly, he looks like a normal dude, like maybe a contract worker, like an electrician or construction worker or something along those lines. He's wearing a baseball cap and a collared shirt in the sketch, which could definitely be some sort of uniform or just how the guy dressed. I feel like it's pretty inconspicuous. Looking at his face, he has thin, fluffy eyebrows, ears that are quite tight to the side of his head, thin, pursed lips, and a larger, prominent nose, especially the nostrils on his nose. They look like they kind of stick out really far on the sides compared to like the shaft or base of his nose. It seems to me that the man is white based on the shading in the sketch, and to throw it out there, I 150% do not think this sketch looks anything like Garrison Bowman. But John, I want to know what you think of this guy. Does he look weathered to you? Do you think he looks like Bowman? What are your initial thoughts or things that might stand out to you when you're looking at this?
Absolutely not. This guy looks like your average, run-of-the-mill, blue-collar working white dude. Bowman looked like an Amish guy to me, with his weird neck beard thing going on. This guy is clean-cut, and the facial features don't seem to be similar either.
Yeah, for sure. Bowman literally looks nothing like this sketch. And I'll put a side-by-side on our website and Instagram post too, so you can all see like what we mean. So the second sketch that they release is of a truck, which looks to be like a flatbed work truck of some sort. Again, this sketch will also be on our socials if you want to take a look at it. To me, I find this to be a bit weird because why would the person who is going to kill the Shorts show up there in such a unique type of vehicle? This is definitely something that would stand out if you were looking at someone's house and saw it parked in front of the house or in the driveway. Looks to me like the type of truck someone who worked in construction or landscaping might use. I mean, it doesn't even have a regular truck bed, it's a flatbed, so it's specifically used for things like transporting heavy loads of materials. I think that definitely gives a hint at who our perpetrator is or potentially what they do for a living.
Or it could be a red herring and a vehicle used by the killer to throw investigators in that direction.
Very true. Sometimes things really are just inconspicuous, but because of the fact that a crime occurred, we're all like jumping to the conclusion that every little thing means something.
Right.
Well, those 2 sketches were released well over a decade ago, and nothing has come from them in that time. The case seemed to have gone cold until it would be reignited again in the media, and for just that reason. The Short family home would burn to the ground on February 20th, 2019. Police had announced that they do not believe that the fire itself had anything to do with the murders, especially since it happened nearly 17 years after they occurred. Apparently, the home had been empty for a couple of months before the fire started, but people had been living in it over recent years. However, even though police don't believe the fire had anything to do with the murders, the family of Michael, Mary, and Jennifer seem to have different thoughts on it. One good point that the family members brought up was the fact that the house had been empty. There was no electricity set up in the home. So, how could the fire have even started? It looks to me like the property was on a relatively good-sized lot, and it doesn't look like it had spread from anywhere else. It was also noted that the weather was normal, and they didn't have any sort of storm that could potentially have started the fire either. So, if no electricity or potentially any other utilities are on in the house, how could it have just burst into flames? It's a bizarre situation and makes me wonder why or how it could have happened.
Well, if it was vacant, there could have been squatters staying in the house, and maybe it was an accident. If there's no utilities in there, they could have started a fire in some type of container or something, and it ended up spreading and burning the house down.
You always have an alternative theory to things that people think are sinister.
I just keep an open mind.
It is also stated that the property was completely demolished and cleaned up very quickly, and everything that was left was disposed of. Also known as razing, which I actually had no idea what razing was, and there were several articles stating that that's what happened, so I had to look it up. I need to work on my vocabulary. The family thinks because of all the odd circumstances surrounding this that there's something someone's trying to hide. Potentially the police? Why though? It seems as though police cared about the case from the very beginning. They did their due diligence and used every resource they possibly could to find Jennifer and Michael and Mary's killer, so what would make them think that then?
I don't think that the police would go and burn down a building to hide evidence. If there was something there that, for some reason, they didn't want uncovered, they could have just collected the evidence and disposed of it.
Well, it's discovered that the police at the time were kinda sketchy. Apparently there was like some sort of big scandal that would happen in the following years centered around money and drugs. The sheriff at the time, Frank Cassell, had actually pled guilty in this scandal and was going to get some sort of punishment for his actions. But I can't say I entirely believe that just because they were doing messed up stuff in regards to drugs and money, that they would botch a murder investigation. There are likely things that we don't know about what transpired, but it seems from the outside looking in that police did do their due diligence in the early days of the investigation and that this scandal likely had nothing to do with it.
Okay, hearing that, putting my tinfoil hat on, my conspiracy theory brain fires up, and now I'm thinking, did Michael move drugs for people and mess something up? We've heard of cartels doing unspeakable things to people in their families, especially if they've been crossed.
That is a definite possibility. And like we've said like 700 times during this episode, we need more information on Michael's personal affairs.
That would definitely help.
After the property burned down, there was again no movement in the case until about a month ago when new articles began circulating online that the case was being reopened. Most of the police officers on the case from the early days have either retired or no longer work in the field. Authorities have stated that it's pretty much an entirely fresh set of eyes on the case. I think that's exactly what cold cases need. Someone who hasn't seen it before, who isn't lost in everything they looked into years ago.
I agree with that, but those fresh eyes are also very limited in what they're able to investigate so many years later. They've got to rely on what's in those case files and hope the people they need to interview are still around, or hell, still alive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd gladly help, and I'll take a look at the case files if they're looking for volunteers.
I'm sure you would.
It was reported in October of 2021 that the FBI, Henry County, Rockingham County, and state police will all be involved in the new task force that's been created to re-examine the case. Police would even come out and say that they had witnesses from 19 years ago that could help to break this case. And as we've said a million times before, you never know whose allegiances change or what you might feel more comfortable coming forward with years later. It's also stated that there are 2 or 3 people who talked all those years ago. I'm assuming those are the people who came forward with the sketches, but that they may not have given all the information they had at the time. I'm not exactly sure what the police have that would make them believe this, and they obviously have not named the people who are of most interest to them. But if I had to guess, I think that they're people who lived in the area and likely saw something around the time of the murders. Maybe they knew the man that did this or had heard from others in the area. Like I mentioned before, they believe the person was familiar with the area. Someone always knows something. Always. So I can only imagine the information these people have that they're potentially withholding. I suspect it could break the case wide open.
Well, maybe if this person is from the area, they got drunk one night and confessed it to someone. And now that person wants to come forward and say something. But who knows? I'm just still stuck on the whole cutting of the phone lines, quick entry, execution-style killings, while Michael and Mary were both sleeping. It just all seems very professional. Not to say that some random person couldn't come up with a plan like that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's just so much to take in and not enough info to come to a real concrete conclusion. Another piece of info that police make public at the time of them reopening the case is that they're hoping to use genetic genealogy to assist in solving the investigation. I know I didn't mention DNA before, but that's because up until this point, no one even knew there was DNA in the case. And if you're unfamiliar with genetic genealogy, according to PBS, it is, quote, genetic or forensic genealogy combines direct-to-consumer DNA tests, like those purchased through 23andMe or Ancestry.com, with the age-old hobby of tracing a family tree with public records, such as birth certificates and land deeds. If a genealogist can find a cousin of an unknown suspect who has left behind DNA at a crime scene, then they can use old-school family trees, sometimes literally drawn on paper or whiteboards, to track down the perp, end quote. I would assume the reason they took so much evidence in the early stages of the investigation was in the hopes that they could use DNA at some point. I mean, where else would they have gotten anyone else's DNA?
I was going to ask earlier if anything like that had been collected, but it had totally slipped my mind. Thinking that they collected over 1,000 pieces of evidence, of course there must have been some type of DNA somewhere.
100%. And now we know why they collected so much. I don't know, maybe someone coughed or sneezed and didn't cover their mouth and boom, there's your DNA.
I suppose. Or they touched something.
Touch DNA, sweat DNA, you know what I mean. It's DNA somehow. Cough, sneeze, touch,
right,
sweat, it's
right.
DNA.
I got you.
Now, using genetic genealogy is risky in general. I mean, any DNA testing is risky when you think about it. Yes, you need smaller and smaller samples as time goes on and technology gets better, but it's a one and done thing. Once you use the DNA evidence you have, that's it. You can't use it again. So, depending on the size of your sample, you could have completely wasted it. According to the sheriff, they're definitely considering the use of genetic genealogy in this case based on DNA evidence found at the home, but he states they need to, quote, maintain the longevity and integrity of the case. And he continues stating that they, quote, don't want to waste evidence just in case it can't be used again, end quote. The Short family was killed over 19 years ago, and they, like so many others, deserve justice. Family members of Jennifer's would go on to describe her as a combination of her parents and that she, quote, was kind of shy until she got to know you, like her mom. But once she got to know you, she was just like Mike, a lot of mouth, end quote. They also ponder about what Jennifer might be like today if she were still alive. And this is the part in the case that just broke me while I was researching. I go back to thinking about how I was her exact age when she was killed and how her life could have turned out by looking at my own. Her family wonders if she would have been married or what job she might have. I wonder the same thing. She deserved a full and happy life, but that was unfairly taken from her. Every year on the anniversary of the murders, remaining family members put on a motorcycle ride in remembrance. Yellow ribbons are used to remember Jennifer as they both ride and walk to bring awareness. Unfortunately, in 2020, they were unable to complete the ceremony because of COVID. That marked the first year they weren't able to celebrate the memory of the loved ones they lost, which is so unfair. So that's where it stands at this point. The case is unsolved, but there are absolutely people out there that know something. Police continue to search and are waiting on that one missing link to bring this case to a close and provide justice to the Short family 19 years later. If you know anything at all about who killed Michael, Mary, and Jennifer Short, please contact the Henry County Sheriff's Office at 276-638-8751 or Crime Stoppers at 276-632-7463. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.